It is a great pleasure to introduce this panel today on critical raw materials for the, thank you, on critical raw materials for the net zero transition. With us today, we have the pleasure of having three types of stakeholders joining us. The first one, Mr. Dionysios Gkoutis, traveling from Greece, who heads the Greek government's geological survey. And with us, of course, George Christidis, a legend in the nuclear industry, not just in Canada, but abroad. He's with the Ontario Power Generation Authority and with the Canadian Nuclear Association. There was logic behind the composition of this panel. First, we start with the end users of critical raw materials. In this case, renewable energy or net zero carbon-free energy, specifically the case of nuclear. Of course, then, government, in the case of geological surveys, and we don't expect that everybody knows what a geological survey of a government does, but what they do is that they are the first ones to go and screen for early geological data that then is offered for free and openly and transparently to the market, where investors and geologists or folks from the academic sector do further research and then develop business cases that eventually, many years, if not decades later, become operating mines. And yours truly from the folks in between, which is folks that mine, process, and then manufacture specialty materials. Thank you very much for joining us both. Let me start with you first, George. Canada has a legacy in nuclear power, both production and technology development. Can you tell us more about Canada's legacy in that?
Yes. So, can you hear me? It's not sure if this works. Hello? Test. This one works. So again, σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ for the opportunity. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the question. Yes, Canada's had a long legacy with nuclear technology. It's based on the CANDU legacy, CANDU supply chain, CANDU technology that sort of started off the process. And we've seen that really grow here in Canada, where a very substantive part of the supply chain and the Canadian nuclear capability is really focused in Ontario, but also involves the province of Saskatchewan and New Brunswick. And based on that foundation and based on the recent successes that particularly Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power have had in refurbishing their nuclear fleets in Ontario, which represent about $26 billion worth of investments in projects that are critical infrastructure that are on time and on budget, that has laid the foundation for a lot of international interest in terms of Canada, in terms of how those projects have proceeded on time, on budget, and laid the foundation for new technological evolutions and opportunities associated with small modular reactors. And that is increasingly becoming the interest in a lot of different new nuclear markets, is really understanding how small modular reactors could provide solutions for energy security, climate goals, on-grid, but also off-grid situations. And Canada is really very well placed, Ontario particularly is very well placed to lead that discussion and those opportunities.
And George, thank you so much for that. And, looking back to 5 years ago, at least when I got in this business of critical minerals, you looked at the Maslow pyramid, and I just made this up, but the Maslow pyramid of government priorities, and critical minerals were not up there. And 5 years later, we're close to competing for the same attention as AI and crypto, which I think says something. And the way that this ties is that these critical raw materials, say for example the case of rare earths and the rare earth magnets that you make, they are energy-saving magnets, where you put 1 to 2 kilograms of a magnet of these critical raw materials in the motor of an electric vehicle, and you save 20 to 30% of the battery size of an electric vehicle, which is an order of magnitude more of weight while achieving the same range. Or the case of lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite for batteries. In the case of nuclear, it's uranium, and we'll get to that. But before, it all starts from stuff coming out of the ground. So tell us more about how this came to attention, things like the EU Critical Raw Materials Act and Greece's role in this.
Yeah, first of all, let me thank you for the kind invitation. It's great to be among you and visit this beautiful country and beautiful city. We have a new target. A new target that we have is the net zero. To achieve the net zero, we have to do a technological leap. We have to change the way we're living. We have to change the whole world. Right now, the microphone that I hold has 6 different minerals: gold, silver, nickel, copper, rare elements, and lithium. 4 of them are critical. Imagine now how much many minerals and the quantities that we need to achieve the net zero, to achieve the Green Deal, the transition of energy. This is what made the European Union to release a new act, the CRM Act, the Critical Raw Material Act, that will try to secure our supply chains and will increase our independence. The Critical Raw Material Act, the CRM Act, has 4 main targets. Target number 1, extraction. 10% of the overall European Union consumption in critical raw materials has to be achieved inside the boundaries of European Union. Second, processing. 40% of the annual consumption of European Union in critical raw materials should be happen inside Europe. Third, recycling. 15% of our annual production should come from recycling. And the fourth, and one of the most difficult targets, not a single third-party country should provide the European Union more than 65% of our annual production. That means China. So all these targets are quite difficult to be achieved in the next 5 years because we have to do it in 2030, but it's our obligation to try. And European Union has made clear that this is a strategical point of view. We have to submit strategic projects. I think last month 170 strategic projects have been submitted for all over Europe, and 3 of them were from Greece. That was Metlen who submitted 3 of them. And hopefully we will manage to achieve those goals, and Greece will be able to help significantly towards this direction, and I will have the pleasure to tell you more later on.
Thank you so much, Dionysian. For the benefit of the audience, or for those that weren't here a year ago when we were having a similar discussion, this is now the 3.0 version of this discussion. The good thing is that every year there's something new, including, compared to a year ago, the ratification of the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, as Dionysios was saying. And for the folks that maybe weren't here a year ago, the reason that this is a thing, and it has become a big deal in Europe and North America, in the Western liberal order, for lack of a better geographic term, is because there are certain jurisdictions like China, mostly China, that have very high concentration of these supply chains, whether it's mining, whether it's processing, whether it's downstream specialty material, of critical raw materials for the net zero transition. And as the jurisdictions in Europe or in North America are trying to reshore or establish these supply chains, the business case is just not there. And so you either needed a lot of subsidies, which up until a couple years ago were a miasma. When globalization was still cool and industrial policy was a miasma, so were subsidies. Now they're coming back into trend. But additionally, and this is what makes Europe different, is regulation. It's probably the strongest muscle of Europe in lack of a large budget. It only has 1/30 of the budget of the US federal government. And so what he did, and what the EU Critical Raw Materials Act is about, is that it developed targets. And with that, businesses now, such as the 170-something strategic projects that are being pursued in Europe, are able to have a de-risked market case because there's a minimum demand that will come domestically from Europe for European and allied producers. And so in the case of nuclear energy, the obvious critical raw material is uranium. In some more exotic cases, but only a couple of reactors online, thorium nuclear reactors too, but it's mostly uranium. Can you tell us more about Canada's role, not only in nuclear technology, as you were telling us earlier, George, and power generation, but also the critical raw material, uranium.
Yeah, and thank you for the question. So indeed, part of Canada's leadership is, as you pointed out, not only the technology side and the supply chain associated with that, but also the uranium and its associated supply side as well. So in Canada, companies like Cameco, for example, based in Saskatchewan, are like number one, if not number two, in the world generation of uranium. And in the geopolitical context, we're seeing a lot more interest in Canadian natural resources, including uranium, to offset maybe dependency on other countries such as Russia in this sort of very politically sensitive environment. I need to also maybe just flag to you part of the connection with the minerals side or the mining side is we're also seeing as the technologies evolve in nuclear is not just about the large reactors or the small reactors, and small reactors are defined about 300 megawatts, for example. We're also talking about very, very small reactors, 50 megawatts and the like, which are starting to become of interest in the natural resource development sectors. So in the Canadian context, you have Canadian companies in Alberta or Saskatchewan and other spaces that are in the mining sector, that are in the resource development sector. They're starting to take a look at how they could reduce emissions, have a guaranteed supply of clean energy or non-emitting electricity as a way in their own industrial processes. And those are also starting to emerge in conversations in industrial parks. So you can imagine that in not only in sort of the large nuclear space, but the small and very small, countries like Greece should start to think about a multi-technology approach. There's been a lot of positive developments in Greece in terms of its energy policy, the move towards renewables. But as the country grows, as more demand for electricity exists and development in terms of the resource development sector and other sectors like shipping, whatever, it has to be a little bit open to the concepts that there are other technologies that could be on the menu for its own consideration. And it's really up to Greece to decide what's right for itself. But where we're coming from, we're seeing an evolution, a very strong international trend, whether it's Eastern Europe, whether it's the Balkans, whether it's in Asia, in Africa, where they're starting to take a look at these technologies, both again from the large perspective, but also the small perspective. And Canadian uranium is being really looked at as a source in a global market.
Thank you, George. And I'm pretty excited about maybe a next chapter of this conversation where we can investigate more Greece's appetite and maybe potential pathway to adopting and deploying maybe small modular nuclear reactors. But before we get there, let's start first with what critical raw materials for the net zero transition are currently being extracted in Greece. The two obvious cases, and we've heard it this year from Metlen Mytilineos. We heard it last year at the same panel from George Burns, the CEO of Eldorado Gold. In their case, in Eldorado, obviously they're mining for gold, but a major byproduct is copper, which is a critical raw material for electrification and grids. And in the case of Metlen, obviously the bauxite mining, conversion to alumina, and then aluminum. What is that contribution of Greece? Do you see it being appreciated in Europe? Do you see international supply chains turning to Greece more and more?
Yeah, Greece has some important deposits on critical raw materials. As you correctly said, two of the biggest players in the market right now is Metlen, which has the largest deposits of bauxite in Europe right now. And hopefully by changing their processing cycle, they will manage to produce also gallium, which is in the critical raw materials lists. And on the other hand, we have Eldorado Gold and Hellas Gold, the Greek company who exploits one of the biggest deposits of copper and gold in Europe. All these, both those deposits are quite significant for Greece, but we also have other stuff. I have to mention to nickel, and because I can see that Minister Papathanasis is here, that this government has made a huge effort to try and to find a viable and trustworthy investor to make Larco work again, to have quite significant deposits of nickel that can help us to do the transition, the energy transition, and work towards the net zero. But I would like to point out two new opportunities. Opportunity number one, antimony. Antimony is a critical raw material, and it's not produced anywhere in Greece, in Europe. There is no extraction of antimony in Europe. We are almost 95% dependent from China, and there is a small mining procedure in Turkey. Right now, in the northern part of Chios, we have found deposits of antimony, and in collaboration with the Ministry of Energy and Environment, until the end of this year, we are expecting to have a new bidding process, so an investor will have the rights to do more specific research and then create a new mining procedure in exploiting the antimony deposits. We also have done this procedure in the southern part of Greece in Molaus, where we have a significant deposit of zinc. But the company who took the rights to do the exploration on this mining area, public mining area, they found something else. They found germanium. Back in the 70s, when my institution did the search in this area, we found the deposits of zinc, but back then we didn't know about germanium. So now we have deposits of germanium in Molaus, and hopefully they will be able to be also processed and move forward to creation of a new area, of a new mining area. At the same time, last year, the end of December, we finished our feasibility report and our mineralogical report in Kimeria. Kimeria is a small village in the north part of Greece, close to Xanthi, where we have an important deposit of copper. So hopefully, the next 2 or 3 years, we will have a lot of activity in bidding processes from the responsible ministry. It's not an easy process because we have to raise public awareness, we have to answer the problems that the communities have about this type of activities, but we're getting there, and I'm hoping that we will able to have new deposits, because our strategy is to reinvestigate all deposits of strategical raw materials in terms of critical raw materials. So we have public mining areas where we have found copper, we have found gold, but we know that we're using new technologies, going deeper, going to more specific scientific way, we will manage to increase our deposits in critical raw materials.
Thank you, Dionysis. And, it's a rare occasion where someone from the private sector says that, we got it wrong, the government got it right. But here we are, back in July at a meeting with Minister Zdoukou. I had a heated debate with the minister and her colleagues and your colleagues, Dionysios, arguing that antimony is useless. There's a regulatory trend for, irrelevant reasons, and so antimony is being substituted and replaced. And they were like, no, your intelligence is wrong. So we had that heated debate. It was heated by Canadian standards. And then lo and behold, a month later, the government of China announced an export control and ban of antimony. And so in full shame, I reached back. And it comes to show, though, that the Greek government and Greece that does not have the longest and, largest history and legacy in mining, there are resources that are being allocated now on the subject, and especially on critical minerals. The intelligence that the government is getting on these things and its pursuit of trying to be part of these critical supply chains is meaningful, it's serious, and it's consequential. In the case of gallium that was mentioned earlier, gallium, there's no primary gallium production outside of China right now. And there's only 1 or 2 sites where there is primary germanium production outside of China. The reason is that gallium is a byproduct from bauxite to alumina conversion. It comes out of the Bayer liquor for all the chemistry enthusiasts. And in the case of germanium, it's again a byproduct of zinc, which is the case of Morlaos that was mentioned. And so Greece has this opportunity of capturing these byproduct benefits from mining, from recycling, from tailing ponds. In the case of Larco that was mentioned earlier, it pains me. Larco has been mostly unpopular over the years in Greece, but Larco 2 or 3 years ago during the energy crisis, when electricity prices were rocket high in Europe, was the last operating and only operating nickel smelter in Europe. And it pains me that nobody raised attention to that. There was no media coverage on it. We weren't congratulated in Europe for fighting to keep Larco open and complete the privatization process. So Greece, I think, has some successes, and we need to do our parts in recognizing them. So in the spirit of that, and what I hope, but that is nothing more than my personal agenda, will be a success of small modular nuclear reactors in Greece. George, what do you think is the acceptance of both the Greek governments and the Greek electorates? Because the Greek government's position is essentially an extension of the electorates on nuclear energy right now.
Well, I don't want to pretend I know 100% where Greece is at, right? I've had some good conversations with the Greek government. I've had some very good conversations with the embassy. I've had very good conversations with the universities, some of the think tanks that we had the discussion just earlier. So I've gotten a good flavor. And quite frankly, with the organizers here, wonderful opportunities to attend Delphi, Athens Energy Summit, where again, I had an opportunity to hear from Greek energy users, producers, the industry. So I got a flavor for where Greece is at. But I can't speak to where they are to accept or not. But I can speak to the Canadian story, and I can speak to where nuclear is going. Nuclear technologies are increasingly being put on the table as part of the menu to address energy security and climate goals. Full stop. You're seeing an evolution in Europe on taxonomy. You're seeing the creation of new nuclear markets in Eastern Europe, the Baltics, the Balkans, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America. There's some, Jamaica starting to show interest. So, and it's all around the need for a lot more energy. And that demand for energy isn't just linked with the climate agenda. It's also linked with economic growth, shifting the economies, for example, data centers and other things that will demand. And people have concerns about data centers. That's another discussion. It's not really my mandate, but how does jobs get sustained? What does it mean for society? But the point is, all these economic activities are going to need a lot more energy. Therefore, nuclear technologies, large or small, are increasingly being looked at. And I think it's in that spirit that Greece needs to kind of understand, what does this mean for itself? Because around its neighborhood, it's happening. You have Turkey developing a nuclear program. Bulgaria has one. Other Balkan countries like Serbia are starting to show a little bit of interest. Eastern Europe, we know Romania, for example, long can-do history there. So it should be part of the conversation. There's legitimate questions with regards to safety, regulations, nuclear waste, but I'd offer up Canada as an example of how this is all being addressed. We are a tier 1 nuclear country. The success story here in Ontario is sort of world class and beyond. Saskatchewan with uranium mining. New Brunswick has got its own nuclear program. And we have had these conversations. We continue to have conversations. So when you talk about social license, it doesn't stop. It's not a start and then the project is approved and then it stops. It's an ongoing process. So the work that's done here, for example, Ontario Power Generation or Bruce Power or Cameco in mining is an ongoing conversation with local communities. And in some cases, here in the Canadian context, Indigenous communities. So it has another dimension, First Nations, Indigenous communities. So I'd offer up that Canada has a model on social license and discourse. It has a model in terms of technology, supply chain, and I pointed to a success where how all these conversations can occur on an ongoing basis, right? That ultimately improves the lives of citizens. What are we talking about here? We're not just talking about building nuclear plants for the sake of nuclear plants. What we're talking about in Greece terms, and I'll lean in a little bit, is about a safe, reliable electricity sources to back up the economic engines of those islands. You know, people look at those islands and they think of the beaches and the sun. It's beautiful. We all do that. They are multi-billion euro machines. Do you really want to risk the energy reliability of those machines? Meaning tourism wants air conditioning. They have hotels. They have whatever they might need, the infrastructure. So at what point does Greece need to make sure there's resiliency and energy security from that lens? Not only the geopolitical. The geopolitical is now, who knows how it goes, that's not my mandate, but energy security from a perspective of reliable electricity for the economy to continue to grow, create jobs across different sectors. And Greece, having gone through the economic crisis, has an opportunity here to kind of lean in. New technologies, new ways of doing things, resource development. So these are the questions that Greece needs to kind of speak to on its own. So from our view, though, here to help in terms of sharing our story, which is a successful story here in Canada.
Thank you, George. And, but we're... Yes, Ambassador, please.
Only a good one. Only a good comment. Here.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Christidis, for your comments. It's really interesting, and we've been talking a number of times on this matter, and I have to tell people here that Greece, of course, so far is negative to nuclear power. We don't like it. Why? Because we are a seismogenic country. We are afraid of earthquakes, and we are very worried about waste. What to do with waste. That's an issue which is not solved. And on top of that is an accident fear, is a war fear. So there are many worries that makes Greece be a country that is totally negative to nuclear power. However, as very recently our Prime Minister said, renewables are not able to cover the gap. We have been following a green energy policy along with the European Union, and we are taking a number of measures to be neutral by 2050. Already, more than 50% of our electricity is produced via renewables. We have plans like the islands that you mentioned. We have the Eco Islands, the Greco Islands initiative, which makes small and remote islands in Greece to be sustainable in energy, in cyclical economy, in waste, in all kinds of these aspects of environment protection. Having said that, our Prime Minister recently said that perhaps we have to reconsider the nuclear issue into our mixture to be sustainable in energy. And that is, I believe, that statement is an indication that Greece can start thinking. Greece can start talking about that. Not that Greece will decide very shortly, but being open to a discussion, that is where your job starts. And I would appreciate it if you just collaborate with me and try to find ways to go to Greece, talk to people, and try to find, through your experience, if there are ways to tackle all these matters that worries us, especially the waste, the accidents, and all these other matters that I mentioned before. But there is a window now that opens towards this discussion. And I think it's interesting because Canada is in this fantastic situation to produce these SMRs and to be able to cooperate with us on that. Because if we ever go to nuclear energy, we're only going to talk about those SMRs and nothing, conventional, huge nuclear plant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And to bridge between what the Ambassador and George was saying, as an industrial consumer of energy, industry cannot just accept easily any kind of power. It needs baseload energy. And there are only 4 types of baseload energy. There is coal, which I think for obvious climate change reasons we're trying to phase out. There's natural gas, which is an intermediate transition fuel. There's hydro, which you have to be geographically blessed and lucky to be able to develop it, like Ontario, or Quebec, or Latvia. And finally, there's nuclear. And here's what's at risk. Here's the opportunity cost if we don't develop the critical raw materials and then have nuclear production, nuclear power production in Greece. What is at risk is this. I'm going to touch on something that George said. Data centers. Microsoft, one of the flagship investments of Greece in the last few years was that one of Microsoft. In fact, the president of Microsoft Europe, Brad Smith, wrote a book a year later, or around that period, and he was highlighting the story of how easy and great and fantastic it was to build an AI at the time, a big data center in Greece. And so one wonders, why haven't all these other companies come into Greece and build more data centers? And the thresholds, the challenge that was realized was the availability of baseload energy. This is what's at risk. What's at risk is Greece missing this opportunity, whether it's for AI servers, whether capacity, whether it's for production and manufacturing of green technologies. This is what is at risk. And so I wanted to highlight that. I believe we're way out of time and I'm getting angry looks, but a final quick comment from Dionysis. Does Greece have what it takes to become a leader in mining for critical raw materials?
Yes, we do. We have the people. We have highly qualified experts in this kind of activities. And it is self-proved by how the big 2 companies I just mentioned before are working in Greece. They operate in Greece, and they are reliable. They are relying on the expertise that the Greeks have on this area. We have the willingness, and the government has stated that they're going to support, even with funding, this type of activities, and try to find benefits to de-risk first, initially the research procedure, which is not easily funded by banks. What we're trying to do is, I want to mention that the social acceptance, the social licensing is an everyday battle. We have to talk with the people, try to explain them the benefits, the problems, and that's the first time I say that in public. Tomorrow, a public campaign will start in Kimeria and Xanthi, where we're going to ask all the people there, not all the people, a great sample of the people, what is worrying them in case that we're going to develop a new mining activity. We want to know what people think, what's their worries, what troubles them before we start doing anything there. Because it's proven that as more you talk with the people, you explain to them, you hear them, you try to understand their worries, at the end of the day, you will manage to break through all the resistance and create something which will benefit the country and the people. And that's why we also did a strategic move to create the National Geological Museum of Greece, because we want to teach young people from the early stage of their life how important minerals are in our life, in everyday life, daily life, and try to educate people.
Well, no, George, did you?
Yeah, and I just wanted to again thank you very much, and thank the ambassador, and the opportunity here to just remember, like from our perspective, Greece has a lot of friends. And you heard from the premier. You're going to hear from Minister Lecce, who's a real strong advocate for the energy sector here in Ontario. You have friends in Saskatchewan, where I come from. You have friends in New Brunswick. We have friends that can share knowledge, and help to inform that conversation, that Greece itself will lead and do on its own. It's just, we're there for you. We're there for you to provide information in terms of our experience, and on issues like waste, and on issues on regulatory, and issues on university linkages, capacity building, all those areas, we're there. We're there as a resource for you, and you have a lot of friends in Ontario, Canada, to bring that to your discussion. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.